Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another TUC webinar. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes to let everyone join us here in the Zoom room. It's great to see so many people joining us for today's subject. We'll be getting going in a minute or two. Please do say hi. Tell us your union, maybe where you're joining us from in the chat. So, hi everybody. Big welcome to today's webinar. We'll be getting going properly in about a minute. Just a quick point. About 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, we did a webinar, what I thought was our last webinar of the summer. And I said, we'll see you all in September, but we're back. We're back today. We're back next week. We've got so much we want to fit in between now and Christmas that we thought we'd start early. So hope everybody has had a great summer so far, that you've survived the heat waves if you've had them, and that you're all like raring to go, full of energy for the start of the next academic year in a few weeks. So I will start with some housekeeping. Big welcome to everybody who's new today. If this is your first webinar, big welcome back if you are a repeat viewer. I'm Anna from the TUC. I'm joined by my colleague John, who I will be getting to introduce himself in a second. We do, of course, have live captions on today's webinar. If you select the closed captions button, which is at the bottom of the screen, you can follow along with those. And we have saved some time for some questions for John. Do put those in the Q&A panel, also at the bottom of the screen. We've also had some emailed in advance, so I'll be looking at some of those as well. We also have some polls for you today, which will flash up on the screen. We'll be asking you to vote, tell us about your workplace, and we're also going to be asking you some questions to put the answers in the chat, because we like hearing from you as well about what's going on in your workplaces. So today's subject is electronic balloting, and this is a new subject for all of us. Well, all of us probably, except for John. It's certainly new for me. Perhaps a first for the TUC. This new this change in the rules for unions comes into force today. It comes into force on the 25th of August, which is today. So this is a big deal for us that we're doing the webinar on the day that the rules change, which I think is something that we should be celebrating and sort of marking. So we are with this webinar. So, as I said, I'm joined by my colleague John. John heads up our work on digital unionism, and specifically something you might have heard of called the TUC Digital Lab. We will post a link to that in the chat so that you can take a look at the work he's been doing. But I'm going to hand over to John now just to tell us a little bit about himself and to get us started with what do we mean by electronic balloting and what does it mean for unions. So over to you, John. And because, like I said, this is new to me, so I might dive in with a couple of questions as well while you're telling us about it.
Brilliant. Please do, Anna. Thank you. And it is fantastic to be here. Like Anna said, this is a new subject to most people. I've been working on it for quite a while already. And to have a day when unions gain new rights is definitely worth celebrating. So I'll raise a cup of tea to that one. I work on issues around digital change in unions at the TUC, and helping unions make the most of technological change to do all the kind of things that unions do, from campaigning to organising to representing members and supporting members. What we're going to cover today, specifically on the online balloting, is what it is, what new rights we're getting around this today, why that really should matter to us, the new detail of the new regulations, things we've got to look out for. Not everything is as we entirely want it. What it might look like in practice. So what's it going to look like when people are voting online? What can you expect? And what should unions be preparing centrally in branches across the whole union in order to make the most of it. We're going to have a speedy case study from Ireland, where they've had these rights for a while already. And then, as Anna says, we got a chance to get into some questions on this. But as Anna says, this has been around for a long time. Um, this is the first press release that, or first press story the TUC put out about the campaign to get e-voting. I know it because I wrote it 23 years ago, and have been with this campaign for a very long time. Here I am 10 years ago with some other colleagues presenting a petition during the Tories trade union bill, where we were trying to get them to make some improvements to online balloting rather than to make it all worse. Um, so it's something we've been working on for a long time, and I really can kind of like uh, feel the benefits that we're getting today, which is fantastic. So what electronic balloting is, it's, to let you down a little bit, it's just balloting. Um, the most of what we do with electronic balloting is going to be run in pretty much the same ways um, as it has been in union postal balloting. It's still the same choice our members have to make, whether it's choosing our leadership, whether it's choosing for strike action, whether it's mergers and amalgamations, anything like that. The decisions that union members are making are still the same. All that's different is that they're going to be voting instead of by putting their piece of paper in the post, they're going to be voting through a website, and they're going to be sent to that website by an email or by a text message. The idea is that the system will be secure, hack-proof, verifiable, and that members will be able to have confidence that they've submitted their votes, it's instantly gone in, and they know they voted. So hopefully it's going to improve everybody's experiences of voting all round over the current postal system that we have. So it's been 23 years coming for unions, but during that time, the rest of the world has not stood still, and loads of other organizations have been using online voting in different forms. We want to do a little poll here. We want to see who's already tried this, not for their union, but for something else. What organization did you try it with? So if we can launch the poll, here we go. So any of these, give them a tick, as many as you've done. You might have voted in all of these, um, and we'll just get a sense of how e-voter friendly you guys are.
So this is quite interesting, seeing the votes come in. John, are you surprised of how much people have used it before?
I would be if I could see it.
Oh,
I'll
sorry.
see,
It's on
I'll see it in a minute.
it's yeah.
It only goes to the woman in charge so far.
Okay. I can talk a bit about what's coming through. So we've got uh 50%, just under 50% in political party elections. And the next highest is anything else.
Ah,
Which, yeah, that's the one that surprises me. So we've got
there
the
could be
Building
school
Society
clubs, social
AGM.
clubs, loads
Yeah,
of different societies that people are part of.
exactly. That's what I wondered, whether it would be something that's, that's something people maybe do it in their free time, like a sports club or something that they might vote electronically. So yeah, that's really interesting. We'll keep it running a couple more seconds just because we can still see some votes coming in. Um, Well, actually, the leader is now the anything else category.
If you've gotten anything else, stick it in the chat as well. That'd be really interesting to see.
Yeah, do tell us where you've used it that's not one of the options listed there. Student union elections. Yeah, that's a good one, which we didn't include. Let's see what other people were saying. So maybe other union votes, pay deals, local council, etc., etc.
Yeah, and the non-statutory voting, which is
Yeah,
importantly unions have been able to do for some time. Brilliant.
Okay, I think maybe the votes have stopped coming in for that one. So, should we share those
Yeah.
onto the screen, Yusuf, so people can quickly have a look? There we go. Hopefully, everyone can see those now.
So that's a pretty big proportion of people when you consider that obviously not everybody is a member of the co-op or of a political party. So um, that would seem to be that the majority of people have cast at least one vote um, online through some channel so far. So that's great. We can pack up and go home. We don't need the rest of the webinar. So thank
No,
you for that, there,
please
Yusuf.
do.
Please do
Let's
stay.
carry on.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've got another poll for you in a minute, but we'll go back to the information that John's prepared.
Yes. So what we've got next, could you zoom on the slides, please? Here we go. Is a video. So this is given to us by one of the scrutineers, um, who are the companies that conduct ballots for unions, and a company called Civic who do quite a lot of union ballots. And they've just recorded us a very short what it looks like to the voter, so we can those people who haven't yet voted for something can see what happens in this.
You will either receive an email with voting instructions or a voting paper will be sent to you by post. If you have received your instructions by email, you should click on the link in your email. This will usually be a unique link that will complete your security code for you on the login page. Otherwise, you'll be able to find your security code in the body of your email. If you have received your voting instructions by post, you will find the address of the voting website and your unique security code on the voting paper. There may be a QR barcode on the voting paper that you can scan on your phone to launch the voting website. The security code is unique and can only be used once, so don't share it with anyone else. Once you've entered the security code, click Login. Once you are logged into the voting site, you will see your voting instructions. The instructions will vary depending on the voting system. Please read the instructions and review any additional information before casting your vote. Once you have cast your vote, you will have the opportunity to review and confirm. Check your votes. If correct, click the Submit button. To change your vote, click Previous Page. By clicking Submit, you will have confirmed your vote and it will have been recorded.
Oh, sorry to the colleagues there who found that was a little bit quiet, but hopefully that just gives you a sense of um, how it will look as you go through and the steps that you have to go through too. Brilliant. So just thinking about how well what you've seen would work with your branch. So if your members were being asked to vote, that example was a like for voting for an executive, so where you could vote for multiple candidates who are standing for election, but it could be a strike ballot, could be a political fund. Um, how confident would you be out of 1 to 10 that your members could cast a vote using a system like this? So like 1 is none of our members would ever be able to vote with this system. 10 is none of our members would ever have a problem with this system. Um, there's a poll popping up on your screen. Pick your number for confidence about how broadly across your branch um, you think your members would be happy with a system like the one you just seen in the video.
So I know at the moment, maybe John, you can't see the results, but I am pleasantly optimistic about the sway towards the higher end of the scale. We do have a small number voting in the two, three, fours, but the majority are seven and upwards, which is great to see. Um,
Definitely, and also I think it shows that it's a bit horses for courses. That some groups of workers are going to be more able and accustomed to have the tech and be willing to take this on. Others maybe less so. And the union's going to be free to choose methods, and we're going to come on to talking about that in a bit.
And I've also spotted that a couple of people in the chat have said they'd be fine with people's confidence in voting. The issue might be in getting them to do it. So we're
Yes.
also going to come back to that as well. And some of the issues around people not necessarily opening emails or using their phone. So we'll come back to that. But again, this is really helpful for us to see where things are with you in your union. So I think we're done with that poll
Yeah,
now.
we are. Thanks for that.
Great
That's really
stuff.
encouraging.
So I think that the next thing is we are going to ask a question of you, all in the audience, or John's going to ask a question of you, and we want you to tell us the answer in the chat. Now, it will go by quite fast, so I'm going to have a look to see how many I can catch. But if we don't catch them all, this is still really helpful to us. John and I will go through, your postings afterwards, and we will make sure that we consider everything that you're saying.
Brilliant. So yeah, we're asking why this matters to unions. So why should we care about this? We've got these new tools that we can be using. What are the benefits that your union might get out of using this? Yeah, we've got some really good things that fewer ballots lost there. We've got saving of cost.
And these answers are speeding in. Yeah, obviously money, higher turnouts.
Accessibility we got here. Yep. Trust that the stuff has actually reached its destination. Yeah, eco-friendly. We like that.
What one that has sort of whizzed by a few times is about engagement. So
Yeah.
participation maybe can be you know, pretty standard, but you might get more people engaged. You might reach a new audience with this option of voting. Someone's
Yeah.
put accuracy. That's an interesting one. Does research suggest that we might get more accurate results? I mean,
I
never
think
had
when you
cause
wait,
to doubt a physical one.
it depends on what you're talking about accuracy, really, doesn't it? Like whether there was votes that were cast or whether you're getting more representative votes because you're getting more people voting. So your vote is going to be more accurate of the opinion of your branch, or of the group of workers who are voting. Um, the same scrutineers are conducting it, and we trust them as much to do a online ballot as we would with a postal one. Um, so, but if you're getting a greater number of votes in, maybe that's going to definitely going to help with getting a better reflective picture of members' true uh, uh, opinions on something. Could we skip to the next slide? Because we've got some of the Blue Peter stars, some of the things we prepared earlier, some of the reasons that we think it might matter. Higher turnout tends to come a lot of top a lot of unions lists. Now, different unions are going to have different reasons that they want some of this stuff. Um, the we ended up with postal voting thanks to Margaret Thatcher back in the beginning of the 90s, because the government were keen to make union voting harder and to take it out of the workplace where it was a kind of collective issue, take it back home if a few ballots got lost on the way. That didn't matter. If it was expensive for unions to run, that didn't matter. So while the rest of the world was starting to go towards new technologies, we were being legislated backwards on it. We would expect to see a rise in turnouts for elections. Like people have said in the chat, that's not necessarily a given that members are going to be inspired to vote. We've got work to do to get them to turn people out, but the barriers to them voting are fewer, so we'll hopefully get higher turnout. We could get faster ballots. If we've got a ballot that we can ask online only of a group of workers that we're sure can do it online, we can turn this around quickly. And that's interesting to some unions I've been talking to where their workplaces come together in a very temporary way. Think of equity members on a theatre production who only be there for a few months. If they've got to wait a long time for a paper ballot process to happen, then they might not get to call a strike action realistically. If they are able to turn it around quicker during the lifespan of that production, they can get something happening. there's scope for recruitment potentially if you're taking the shortening the balloting period and recruiting right up to the ballot with a message that people who want to get involved in this can sign up now and then get their electronic uh, voting slip. They're saving cash. I mean, if people are sending their votes back on um, by an electronic method, they're not spending the postage. But also, if for those members that we can send electronic um, balloting papers out to, we're printing lots less. As a colleague said in the chat, environmental friendliness of not printing huge brochures and posting them all over the place to people who don't always need them. But we can cut down on that. We can really significantly reduce the cost that unions have to pay for balloting, particularly say for general secretary elections, executive elections, some of the big national ones, political fund ballots. Some people refer to meeting members' expectations. People expect to be able to do this stuff online now. They expect to be able to work with their bank online. They expect to be able to file their taxes online. To do all these different things online is now the first choice of interaction for the majority of British people, of working age particularly. And unions start to stick out if we aren't able to do that. And it's up till now, it's been no fault of our own. We've been the only second society legislated that we couldn't do this, but that makes us look weird to our members. I remember running uh, a recognition ballot campaign with a group of members who are not traditionally unionized, and one of the biggest concerns or complaints we got from them was, why is the union making us vote by post? Is this like an old-fashioned organization? And it just felt weird that we were asking people to step so far outside their modern expectations. Hand in glove with that, increasing member engagement. The more we can get members to interact with us, to feel that they own the decisions that are going through, they've had a part in them, the stronger we're going to make our unions. And last on this list, increasing access to vote. So accessibility, people who may have reasons that they find it hard to vote with a physical paper posted to their address, may live in a place where they don't get post regularly, maybe posted somewhere else, may have visual impairments and not be able to vote independently if they're sent a paper. Lots of these things now with an electronic method of communication become a lot easier for people because they've set up their technology to support them in the way they want it to be done. Can we skip on to the next one of those, please? And I'll just say a little bit now about what it is we've actually got today in the new regulations. This has come about as a result of the Employment Rights Bill, but it's not part of the Employment Rights Bill. So with the 2016 Trade Union Act, the Conservative government at the time put in some measures that said we couldn't have online voting unless certain hoops had been jumped through. We'd had certain types of trials, and the government were never willing to give us the time to run those trials, unsurprisingly. What's happened with the Employment Rights Act is that the day the Employment Rights Act came in, it squashed provisions in the Trade Union Act. And it cancelled those extra hoops that we had to jump through to have online balloting. And it meant that the Secretary of State could of business and trade could lay secondary legislation that didn't have to get parliamentary approval, just had to have some consultation, and could be a fast track way to changing within the existing framework to expand on legislation. So they've used this route to adapt the existing legislation. We're going to see in a minute where that's made a few limitations in what they've been able to provide, because this is not new primary legislation. This has been adapting the 1992 legislation, but it's been enabled by the passage of the Employment Rights Act. And what it's given us, in addition to the method of postal balloting for statutory elections, so strike ballots, governance ballots, mergers and transfers of undertakings, political fund ballots. We also now have the ability to use fully electronic voting. That means a ballot paper sent out electronically by text message or by email, or by a mobile messaging service, which is a way of not saying WhatsApp. But that would just be where the entire election is conducted out electronically and back electronically. We've got the ability to use hybrid. Now that's where we can post papers out. And like you saw in that example, there's a QR code to scan or a web address to go to for you to send your vote back without having to post it back. We can do workplace balloting for industrial action only. And we can do a mix of all of those methods and post. So, for example, we could look at our data and say, well, we're going to send this group of people their voting papers by text message and this group of people their voting papers by post because we don't have a mobile phone number for them. So that's what we've got. There are some limitations. Nothing comes through exactly as we wanted it. And probably the biggest of these is that we are not at the moment able to use workplace emails. Now, this is a function of having adapted existing legislation rather than written new legislation for it. They were trying to get through so much in the Employment Rights Act that they took the easier route with this part of it rather than writing a whole new set of balloting legislation. The problem comes in that under the existing legislation, a ballot can't happen if it could be interfered with. So if the union or particularly the employer could get into that ballot, stop it happening, influence the result of it. And at the moment, an employer theoretically could block the union's emails that were coming into that address. They could surveil traffic on their network and stop the vote happening or see what the vote was. And at the moment, there isn't a sanction in law on the employer against doing that. We'd need to establish not just the voting methods, but the idea of some kind of enforcement mechanism on employers that would stop them from these unfair practices. Some parts of law have those unfair practice clauses. This one doesn't, unfortunately. So at the moment, because the employer could mess with an election if it were run using workplace emails, we can't currently use workplace emails, only personal emails and personal mobile phone numbers. The second limitation is that workplace ballots are going to need employer agreement at the moment. So that's where the employer has agreed and worked out the terms under which you can access the workplace, the ballot. The next big problem is that Northern Ireland is out of sync with the rest of Great Britain. So in Northern Ireland, trade union legislation is devolved, and the Northern Ireland executive has to work out which parts of Westminster legislation they want to adapt for Northern Ireland. Now, they have their own copies of the balloting regulations for postal ballots. Their civil servants are looking at adapting the Westminster legislation, but we've heard it could be up to a year behind the England, Scotland, Wales. Now, for a lot of ballots, that doesn't cause us a problem. If all the constituency for that ballot are in England, Scotland, and Wales, we can just go ahead and use the methods we want. If we've got national ballots that include Northern Ireland members, those members are going to have to balance it postally. And the real annoyance is with political fund voting. If it's a political fund vote, because the legislation that governs political funds is different from the industrial legislation, there's a kind of clash of jurisdictions in it. And if that happens, if a union wants to run a political fund vote to establish, get rid of, change a political fund, and that ballot includes members in Northern Ireland, until the Northern Ireland executive have got their new legislation in place, everybody will have to vote postally in all four countries. So that's a really complicated way of saying that Northern Ireland have not yet caught up with this legislation. There are plans to do it. It will take a while. And the last limitation is the small ballot exemption. So for very small ballots in post, the union can conduct them themselves rather than using a scrutineer. The arguments are around cybersecurity, that a scrutineer would be needed for electronic voting, even for the smallest ballots. Now, that may not be as awkward as it sounds, in that the majority of very small ballots that unions conduct go through a scrutineer anyway, because that gives us legitimacy and stops the employer trying to challenge the ballot in the courts. But so we tend to lean on the scrutineer a lot anyway, but that technically is another exemption or a limitation that we've got. And then a little bit about the stages that this stuff is coming in. So the first stage is strike ballots, governance ballots, political funds. That is live today. From today, you talk to a scrutineer and they won't just offer you the postal method, you'll be able to work with them on digital methods too. Recognition ballots are coming a little bit later. And the problem with that is that that will have to use workplace contact data, because the employer provides the data for that, not the union, when it's a recognition ballot. And luckily, there are already provisions in the postal recognition process that says the employer is not allowed to do a certain number of unfair things. All that has to happen is the government have to open that list, edit it to say, right, there's 10 more unfair things you can't do. You can't snoop traffic. You can't delete people's emails. And they can then save the list again. And that will bring recognition ballots compliant. So recognition ballots, we don't have them online yet, but when we do get them in 2027, they will be able to use workplace contact details. They'll be the first ones. And then we're going to have an ongoing primary legislation process to rework the current balloting processes so that unions will be able to get around those limitations. It's just that takes a long time. We've seen already the 2 years it's taken our government to get the Employment Rights Act stuff through. It's starting all over again with some of that. So if we jump onto the next stage of this, there's a few things that unions are going to need to get in place. And the first one of these is around rule books. So if you've read a union's rule book, hopefully you're one of those unions who've got a really short 3 sides of text on A4, rather than one of the unions that published War and Peace back in 1870 and are now governed by a really detailed set of rules. And some unions have the absolute light touch in their rules. They just say they just say that the ballot will be conducted by in accordance with legislation. Now, when the legislation changes, the conduct of the ballot changes, and they're totally happy. Yes, I just seen your comment there, Georgia, and you're one of the ones who are in a much happier place than some of our other unions. The other unions will have written in, the ballot papers shall be posted out to all members, and those little words of posted out mean that the union's rules, if there were any pedants in the union, and whoever thought there might be pedants in unions, those elections could be subject to challenge. So unions are going to have to look through their rules. A lot of unions had rule change conferences this year already, and they've been introducing motions to simplify their rules around balloting. A lot of unions are still to do this. If you are a delegate at a rule change conference, please vote yes, and let's get this fixed. We've got to identify when are the next opportunities that we can change our rules. Sometimes at conferences, sometimes unions have emergency processes for this stuff. But just to look out for complexity in these, sometimes your rules will be specifying different processes for executive elections and general secretary elections. Sometimes they'll be specifying steps that a industrial action ballot has to go through. And you think they're relatively innocuous until you see, actually, no, that the wording of that means the paper has to be returned to the address that sent it out. So look out for that. The next thing that unions are going to have to do is data checking. So this problem that we have around workplace data, a load of our unions will store members' primary email addresses or only email addresses as their workplace one. Now you see that quite a lot especially in the NHS. A lot of NHS email addresses in schools. You'll have a lot of sch.uk email addresses or act.uk email addresses there. Unions are going to have to work out, do we uh, put in options in our databases to store multiple email addresses so that we've got a personal email address and we make it union members aware that they will be balloted on that personal email address only. A lot of unions are going through that kind of process at the moment. We've also got to audit all our data for accuracy. And we've got to build in checking of this data all year round so that we're ready for when a ballot drops, because the fact that we can call a ballot quite quickly now, we don't have time to get our data in order before we do it. So if we have 50% of our members' personal email addresses, that's brilliant. If we had 75% of our members' email addresses, we could get even more of those votes out and back in more quickly. So the next step that we have on the slides is thinking about our suppliers. So a couple of people in the chat mentioned that they'd heard of Civica CES before. You'd voted through that for your postal ballots. They are probably the biggest of the union suppliers. There's a list of suppliers that the government maintain of people who are certified and trusted to run union ballots. And that list is locked. At the moment, only 2 of those scrutineers on that list run their own online systems. A couple of other ones can buy in online systems, but it means you've got suddenly a much bigger range of ways you can run a ballot. So unions might want to be just looking at what all the scrutineers are able to offer. Yes, and Julia again is mentioning UK Engage, who are another one of the scrutineers who use third-party tools and get to choose which tools they're going to bring in based on what unions want from the ballot. And that can be quite interesting if the union has a really high security concern, wants a particular way of presenting the voting options, wants to be able to deliver it through a certain channel. It might be that different scrutineers will be able to offer you different things, whereas in the past, all the scrutineers have been sending out all the letters and then counting all the letters that came in. So unions are going to have to shop around a little bit more, just see what's on offer and work out what they want in terms of security, accessibility, and user experience.
John, before we move on, while we're
Yeah.
on the subject of suppliers and sort of the logistics, technicalities of it, a couple of people have asked whether do you have to use Civica? Well, you've answered that. No, you don't.
Yeah.
But they've also suggested, couldn't people not do this in-house? Could it be something that's done internally? And if a union sort of related to this, if a union, for example, Unison, who have a membership portal online already, could votes be carried out within that? So these are kind of 2 related issues towards the technicalities of it that I just thought I'd put to you now before we move on.
Yeah, and they're really good points. I mean, it would be much easier for unions to run their own ballots. At the same time, a lot more employers will be trying to get injunctions against us because we hadn't used an independent, verifiable person to conduct that ballot and check that it was impartial and that the union wasn't seeing the detail of who had voted for what result. That does not mean that unions shouldn't be using these systems themselves. A lot of unions have made really good progress in electronic balloting for indicative ballots, and we've seen a lot of that pop up in the chat earlier on. We were talking about how people had already voted. And yes, unions can run their own indicative ballots. Sometimes there are more indicative ballots going out than there are statutory ones. That could be pay votes, that could be suggestions of kind of people's willingness to strike. It could be ballots for posts in the union that are not statutory ones, like executives or the General Secretary. So it makes sense for unions to be considering their own balloting tools, and how they can use that to basically get in touch with their members more often, get their members' thoughts in more often. That's never going to be bad for the union. Um, the uh, the limitation comes when it falls into one of those statutory criteria where legally it has to be run by an independent party, independent of the union as well as independent of the employer. So to skip on, we've got a really short case study here. Now, our colleagues in Ireland have been able to use online voting. Um, in fact, they never got banned from it. So when we got our postal uh, regulations in 1992, uh, the the legislation in Ireland stayed the same. The uh, Irish unions tend to use scrutineers because they have fewer legal hurdles to get over than we do. They just have to ensure that a ballot is secret, but they tend to go through a scrutineer because that secrecy can be challenged in the courts. And so it knocks back any court cases if they go through a scrutineer. So the Irish experience is relatively similar to ours, in that they're using the same sort of products, and they're using the same scrutineers in many cases. So Forsa is the general union in the public sector over there, and they're the only union so far that have done national statutory balloting online, and they were good enough earlier this year to share a lot of their experience with a lot of our unions, and they talked through how they went about running their big national strike ballots and a lot of other indicative ballots that they've worked on. Um, there's a load of pre-work in this. So when they know there's a ballot coming up, they have spent months beforehand in running update my details campaigns with their members. So they would know that their data was as accurate as it could possibly be when the ballot dropped. They were sending out pre-notification emails to members. They were there explaining to the members what was going to happen with this new system, what it would look like. So sending out that kind of video that we saw. This is what you're going to be able to you're going to see when you get your vote landing. With some of those employers that they could work with, they were doing technical clearing of emails so that the emails wouldn't get blocked. They don't have the restriction around the workplace emails in the Republic of Ireland. They were doing a lot of engagement with their reps. They were explaining the system so that reps could also explain the system in their branches and to their members. And that, we'll see in a bit, became really powerful for them. They were doing a lot in terms of target setting and reporting back. So they were putting in place the ways that branches could talk about how the balloting campaign was going, and the kind of targets that they were hoping for from different branches in order to get their turnout they wanted. And then they had a big get out the vote plan. So they were really localizing the email reminders. They weren't just sending stuff out centrally saying Forster says vote yes. They were getting the reps locally to be sending information to their members, which was much more powerful than a generic marketing email from the union, so that people knew there was somebody who they knew who was talking about this. They were doing daily reporting back to the branches and to the centre to work out how the campaign was going on. And they laid on a lot of help desk capacity to deal with any questions that members had, so that 24/7 members could get advice on what was happening. So what they learned from all that, well, they learned that the first time they tried this is the hardest. And after that, everyone they've done has got a bit easier. They really had to get all hands to the pump. The members were picking up the email in the middle of the night, whenever their shifts ended, just whenever it occurred to them while they were waiting for a bus and trying to vote. And so the request for support was coming 24/7, and they had to put in a lot more advice in answering people's contacts as to how this thing worked, where they weren't able to work it out. They put in a lot of thoughts around the access needs and the fallbacks that they would have if people had a disability that stops them from being able to vote with the online um, system. And in the end, they found that they'd actually overestimated this. More people were happy with that system than had been happy with the postal systems. Um, the Because a lot of disabled members have set up their electronic communications to work in ways that they're used to working with. Um, because this fitted in with that, they found that went quite smoothly. Um, and then they also found a difficulty around data failures. So there were always going to be members' emails that bounced back, and there were needs to quickly update and send out a new electronic ballot paper where they'd got the wrong email address. But actually, every time it's like a muscle. Every time you use it, you get better and stronger. And they found that subsequent ballots, it's always been a problem, but it's been less and less of a problem. One really interesting finding they found is that ballots are a really good recruitment opportunity. You've got a shorter lead up to an online ballot, and you've got lots more indicative voting that you could be doing online. So you can be going around the workplace saying, okay, we're going to decide on the pay deal today. Do you want to be in on the vote? If so, you've got to join. And you look at Force's recruitment graph, and there are spikes right before every indicative and every statutory ballot that they have now, which is where a very large proportion of their voting is coming from. And they found that 90% of people who vote online keep voting every time. It was like a ratchet. Once you got people used to voting in their union elections, they were more likely to do it again and again. So it was really worth the investment in getting through that. Speedy recap before getting on to the kind of questions. How's this going to affect branches around the country? There's going to be different systems for different unions, but there are some common issues that are going to come up. Beforehand, there's going to be keeping members' data accurate, making sure that your branches have methods in place that when you're having conversations with members, you're able to check data and make sure that you're going to be able to get the turnouts among your membership. There's the idea of recruitment in the run-up. What can you do to enthuse people about the fact that this thing is coming and they should join now and they can get in on the vote? And then during the vote, there's checking in with members. Are they expecting to get this email? Don't delete your emails. There's going to be a voting email in there that's really important. And a bit of technical support. If you're able to work the system yourself, explain to members how it went and give them the confidence that they can do it themselves. And then different unions will have different ways to be logging conversations in the workplace that you're having. Has a member voted? Yes, we can report that back. That will help the union know how far we are towards the turnouts we want, and also means we can bother that member less with centrally sent emails telling them to vote in the future. P2P, we have their peer-to-peer texting tools that a lot of unions are using now to enable branches to be having mass conversations at scale, but personal conversations at scale using text messaging to talk to all your membership very quickly and be flexible in your responses to them. If you want to get into some of the nerdy detail and all this stuff, we have written out a report and a practical guide on it, which you can get on the Digital Allow website, and we've got a link posted into the chat there. If there are things that are questions that you particularly have or that are interest for your branches, do look at the contact details in there, drop us a note. And we've been doing quite a lot with a lot of unions around online balloting adoption. So we probably have an answer to some of your questions. That was a lot to get through. And thank you for bearing with it for me. Anna, do we have any questions in?
We do. We've had quite a lot of questions. What I'm going to try and do is group them And in the last 10 few minutes, more than 10 minutes we've got remaining, just try and get you to talk about like broad headings of some of the questions we've had, but all the questions that have been submitted, we'll make sure that we consider them for future guidance that we put out. Okay, we've had a load of questions about this work email, personal
Mm.
email situation. Now, are there any stipulations about what unions must do to make sure that no work emails are being used? And related to that, what would happen if inadvertently a ballot was sent to a bunch of work emails? Not deliberate, but
Yeah.
they just slipped in.
A lot of the stuff in this um, uh, legislation is worked on what they call a Moscow framework. It must, it should, it could, and it won't. So there aren't that many things in here that say you must do this. There's a lot more that say you should do this. And there's the union must put in all um, uh, reasonable checks that you're not using workplace uh, details. Um, if one or two creep in, that is not likely to cause you a problem with the ballot, providing you can demonstrate you're working, that you've considered this and tried to do it and to get it out. Um, and it's going to be harder for some unions than for others. Supposing you're doing uh, a national ballot at United for your general secretary, and you've got 50,000 employers, and you've got to scan the listings for all their possible email formats. It's a lot easier if you are a teachers union and you can just block off anything that says at sch.uk. Or so the scrutineers will be able to advise the unions on that. Scrutineers will work with the unions to get to a point where they're happy that they've put in place all the checks that they can on it. The what happens then when the scrutineers might say, okay, you're trying to ballot people at Rolls-Royce, but we found 30 people here at rollsroyce.com email addresses. Because the methods of ballot are flexible, we'll be able to then say, okay, so those people, they can get their ballot by mobile phone because we've got their SMS detail, or they can get their ballot by post. And the union's got to make a decision to work out what's the way to get a usable ballot in front of everybody. Uh, so yes, doing this becomes a little bit more complicated than just giving all the postal addresses to the scrutineer. But at the same time, that brings with it a bunch of other reasons that we would want to take on that extra work in order to save costs and get better turnout results.
Thanks, John. And actually, something you said there, you then went on to answer. It raised another question with me that if a bunch of people were knocked out by their email address being a work one, does that then mean they don't get balloted? But you covered that by saying, you can send them another way to vote. So that leads me on to my next question: is what if someone is sent two methods to vote, so email and
Yeah.
SMS or SMS and post? How can we, minimize that? And also, what happens if it does occur?
Now, this is going to be where the union has a lot more choices to make in how they conduct their ballot. And the scrutineer will work with you to say something like the first vote cast counts. And if a vote is cast by two different methods, the first one is the one that we're counting. The I think unions may want to only send one ballot paper, whether it's an email or an SMS or a post out, in order to keep their costs down, because then they're being charged less by the scrutineers for all the different methods. At the same time, the priority for them in that ballot may be turnout, and they may be willing to pay a bit more to have a letter and an email go out. So it's up to the union to whether they want to go with one method, provided they think that method will be able to cover all members, or whether they want to go with multiple methods. Um, and they will have to work out with the scrutineer and publicize it in the communications that go out. And the scrutineers are used to this. They run elections for a living. So this is stuff that they have thought of already that explain what happens in the case of multiple votes.
Thanks, John. A couple of related questions here. So you mentioned earlier this idea of a small ballot. What do
Mm,
we mean by a small ballot? Is there an actual number attached to
50.
this?
Uh,
For 50 people. Okay,
and
so
that's at the moment with
that's
postal
interesting.
ballots. Um, as I said, though, the majority of small postal ballots are still run by scrutineers because it that scale, it doesn't cost dramatically more to run it, and it reduces the um, potential of a challenge to the ballot result. So, whilst that's technically a rule that unions can use for postal balloting, it's not one that generally is taken up. So it's not necessarily a loss for us.
That's great, thank you. And I wanted to link that question to cost. So unions are maybe already paying these scrutineer organisations for postal ballots. Is it going to be vastly different to do an electronic ballot, or is it going to be on a par?
There, there are there are scenarios in which this could end up costing more. So supposing you wanted to send your absolute aim was to get 100% turnout, and you wanted to send everybody a postal vote, and you wanted to text them about it, and you wanted to send them an email, so you weren't going to miss a single person. Um, you would end up paying for all those methods. The scrutineers will charge you to be using their online vote system, um, which will cost more. Um, but then you will save money as a union on the amount of post that you're sending. If you think about a general secretary election, and those can get a turnout as low as 10%. Um, if we have a letter out to everybody, we're printing a pack of information. We're sending those large format envelopes through the post to every member. If you're Unite or Unison, you're spending millions and millions on doing this. If they're able to return the vote, then you're saving the return postage on the 10% that have voted. If you're able to send the um, ballot paper out by electronic means, the costs of that sending are very low. So you're going to pay a bit more to to use their system, but the union is going to save hugely on the per member postage costs going out. And what some unions may decide to do is to use the electronic means where they believe that all their members will be able to access it with post as a fallback. So if the email bounces back and that member didn't receive, they know that member didn't receive it, they can send the post out. Or if the member requests that they wanted to get a postal vote, they could get the postal vote.
Thanks, John. And one final question. It's about the information that might be available from the scrutineer organisation following a vote. Are unions going to be able to break it down by perhaps workplace, work sites, grades, region, that sort of thing? And also, if someone hasn't voted, will that information be able to be reported back to the union? This is all like, like
Yeah.
post ballot reporting, basically. That as sort of the final question.
So there's a yes and a no there. Um, the first one depends on the system. It different systems that you use from the suppliers will have different functionality. One system I've seen has portals that branches can log into, and they can see an anonymized version of their vote for their area. And that's a really powerful mobilization tool to know that of your section of the union, 35% have voted so far. How's that going up over time? What they're not doing is telling you who has voted. So and they're definitely not telling you who has voted how. The And that's why a lot of unions will still continue to do a get out the vote campaign, as we put in that last slide, of uh, maybe using something like peer-to-peer SMS. If you're interested in that, have a look on the digital website. We've got lots on it. Plug. But tools that you can go out to ask all your members by text. Hey, it's me, Anna, the rep for the Congress House. Have you voted in the ballot? Yes, no. Because it's texting, you can then respond to people who come back with strange questions, but you can get the majority of the answers back very quickly and into a database and work out, okay, here's the people that we know have voted because they've told us. So I think sometimes when we look at technology, we've got an opportunity to do things really efficiently, run a really effective and efficient service. But unions are not services. We are organizing organizations. We build our strength from the conversations and the people working together in the workplace to achieve something. And so I think get out the vote campaigns are not only with us because of the limitations of the new voting system, but they're probably a really good thing for us to be doing, to having these conversations one-to-one around the ballot. That's the way that we're going to drive real engagement with the union. But thank you for that.
No, thank you, John. And I think that is a great note to finish on. Yes, this is a big change, but I think we can take it forward as a really important change, something that maybe there's a lot of work to do, but that it will ultimately lead to increased participation, increased engagement, which is only a good thing. As I said at the start, this is day one of the rules change. We've got lots to learn, lots to see about how this works out in practice. So we will be sharing the recording with you all, probably first thing tomorrow, along with any resources that we have talked about today. There'll be methods about how you can get in touch with John via the digital lab. We'll be sharing that as well. So do join us again next week for our second webinar of the late summer, which is on LGBT rights and attitudes and what reps can do in the workplace to protect members and workers. So see you all very soon, and bye-bye for now.
Okay, everybody. Bye.